Hey, good morning, folks. This is Jay Frost speaking to you, and now finally on camera, live from Yokohama, Japan, where I'm finishing up the 2.5 weeks here of enjoying the countryside and family and friends, and also eager to come back to the United States, where we're all in the same time zone, at least most of us. I'm going to make sure I encourage all of you, in fact, to let us know where you are today as you join us. We would love that, and I know our guest would as well. So as we begin, please do go ahead and just enter the chat and say howdy. We would love to know maybe where you're tuning in from today, which part of the country or the world. And thank you, Jessica and Carrie and Kimberly, Joel, for warming that up. Ashley, hi there. We really do appreciate that. I'm not going to read all the names because otherwise that's all I would do today, but I love it that you're willing to do that. And if you feel also like maybe saying what organization you're with or what kind of work that you do, we would love all of that too. That really helps to kind of frame the conversation we're about to have with our guest, Sharon Papo. And so please do keep that space as a space for yourselves to talk throughout. We're also going to be monitoring the chat as well as the Q&A so that we can take those questions and make your voices a part of the conversation today. This, of course, is the Philanthropy Mastermind series. I am your host, Jay Frost. And this is brought to you by our friends at DonorSearch. You won't be hearing much about them in this conversation unless our guest chooses to mention them for some reason. And that's not for any lack of affection or appreciation. If it were not for DonorSearch, not only would a lot of organizations not necessarily know where to turn for the donors who make the big difference in their work, but I think most importantly to our conversation, we wouldn't have this body of over 550 programs going back to 2016 with people like today's guest in conversations about philanthropy and fundraising. So I'm really grateful to them for offering that for all of us and for giving me a chance to talk with people like today's guest. If you'd like to learn anything more about either DonorSearch or this series, you can do all that by checking out the DonorSearch.net website and look under the resources tab, and there you will find a directory of most of the content that we've had, at least for the past couple of years, if not going back further. Or if you'd like, you can also subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcasting channels. So that's all a way of saying do check that out afterwards, but do stick around for the conversation today, which of course we're going to be having right now. So I want to welcome up to the screen, if you will, Sharon Papo, who's of course the CEO of Indigo Skies Consulting, and talk a little bit about of her work. And as you know, today's topic is all about authentic donor engagement, which is key to everything we do in this sector. So with that, Sharon, hi, how are you?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really delighted to be here in conversation with you today.
I'm really, really glad that you could make time for this. This is a long time coming because you and I met, I guess, in real life for the first time at AFP just over a year ago.
Yes.
And a lot has happened in this world of philanthropy, including in this specific topic of authentic donor engagement in the last year. But also a lot has happened for you, including the new book, Success Redefined, which is an Amazon bestseller. So I don't have my copy. Would you mind just kind of sharing that so people can see it?
Here it is.
Yes. So there you are on the cover next to Jack Canfield, which is kind of a coup. And for people who don't know who he is, he's the man behind Chicken Soup for the Soul series, which is like the best-selling series of books ever.
Yeah.
So pretty phenomenal. And the title of your work within that work, I'm sorry, I'm not recalling the title.
My chapters look for the pony.
I don't know how I could have forgotten that. Okay, so I know we're going to talk about a lot, but do you mind if I just dig into that just for 1 second? Where did that title come from?
It is from the opening words of the book. It's quoting my mother-in-law, Patty, who says, when put you in a pile of poop and you'll look for the pony. And it's about mindset, which is part of what we'll talk about today too. That when you're in a hard situation, when you find yourself in a pile of poop, you can focus on the flies or the muck, or you can look for the pony, and you have a choice.
I like it that you said that both in such a funny and and nice way, because it seems like if anything, we're dealing with a lot of poop these days in the world of nonprofits. So you got to look for the good stuff, and there's plenty of it, especially in this area of authentic donor engagement. But before we get into that, can you talk a little bit about yourself and about Indigo Skies?
Yeah. Well, I'll share that I got into fundraising early on, and I learned how critical it was because my first job out of college, I was a health educator working with homeless, incarcerated, and foster care youth. And we had a great program, and young people would tell us what a difference it made in their lives. And, we met and exceeded all of our grant goals. And our state grant was not refunded for some reason I don't understand. And then suddenly that program was immediately cut, and I was out of a job. And I, spiraled, and, had lots of feelings about that. And I got another great job, and that was going great. And again, we met and exceeded expectations. And again, that grant went away. And not only did we lose another fabulous program, but I lost my job again being on the program side. And so I learned early on in my career that to make the impact that I'm committed to making in the world, I needed to learn to fundraise, and we needed to diversify our funds, and we needed to have unrestricted funds. And so those were early, powerful lessons that then propelled me into learning to fundraise, where I was 12 years an executive director and got to do lots of fundraising. And after that, now I have the great honor and privilege through my boutique consulting firm, Indigo Skies Consulting, to help others with major donor work and capital campaigns and development plans, all the good stuff. But my background, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. And so really the reason I've always loved fundraising is because I really value relationships. And that's why fundraising was my favorite part of the work. And so I think when we're having these conversations, I think that there's just a lot that I bring from that therapy training in developing relationships. And I'm really happy to have this conversation today.
Hey, we talk a lot about people's backgrounds in the series because it's a chance for us to become aware of how maybe a professional background or a licensing, et cetera, have a potentially huge positive influence in how we view the work. And you're just talking about that. But people may or may not know much about what it is to be a licensed clinical social worker. Do you mind just giving a thumbnail sketch about what that means for those of us who aren't as familiar with the term
Yeah.
and the work?
So it's a therapist, so a mental health therapist. But one of the skills that I think are transferable is that ability to sit down with someone and be really present and listen, and also listen for what people are saying between the lines, behind their words, and in kind of creating that container in a conversation where people feel trust and safety, hopefully, if you're a good therapist. And I think as fundraisers, having these intimate conversations with people about who they are and their hopes and dreams and concerns, there's a lot of the same kind of container we're trying to hold. And I think that that we're going to be using those same skills if we're doing this work well, because it's just about building relationships and being present in them.
Yeah, and it's one thing to say it, as I think most of us do. It's another to practice it, and that's what you had to do before, as you say, before you really did the deep dive into fundraising. And now I'm sure you're bringing that into this discussion, which brings up the other kind of question we talked about before we began today, which is, why is this important to you? So why is this idea about authentic donor engagement important?
Yeah. So there is so much conversation and really exciting conversations about technology. And absolutely, I want everyone to use all the great technology tools out there. But the reason I want people to use them is so it can save us time. So we have the time to build the authentic donor relationships and with our partners and with our colleagues. And I I think the hope that I'm seeing a lot of people have is, oh, we're going to use these tools and it's going to raise the money for us. And that's not how I'm holding it. It's going to save you time, and then I'm hoping that that time that we can use to not burn out, have better work-life balance, and to then spend more time building our organizational family, because we have a crisis of connection. And it's funny, like for my birthday a few months ago, it used to be that people would pick up the phone and call me, and I'd have all these catch-up conversations. And now on social media, people say happy birthday, exclamation mark, I love you, and I notice how things have shifted, and there's still lots of fondness and love, but right, we're connecting differently. And so we have the impact of social media. And then, of course, with COVID, that also clearly really impacted people being together. And then I think that people have felt not only about some lingering health concerns some people have after COVID, but also just feeling rusty in our social skills and not used to being in community and in these conversations. And so
Yeah.
there's, and we have an epidemic of loneliness in, in our world. And that has really great health impacts. There's lots of research that severe loneliness has the same impact on your health as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, and premature death, and all the, clearly the mental health impacts. And so I think that there's really an opportunity for us to build our organizational family, and that is not only going to have people meet a great need in our community, through volunteerism, through donors, but it's good for the world, it's good for our work. And when people feel connected on a real, authentic way, they're going to be loyal donors, right? Because not only do they feel that mission alignment, but it becomes part of their community, and that is a gift upon a gift. So
Yeah, no longer just being treated as ATM machines,
absolutely.
which is, I guess that's what you were talking about with the use of social media to keep those contacts. Those contacts are so, they can often be very shallow there. And in fact, I was just reading a little bit of work done about communications. I wish I could cite this source. Communication between, I think it was mothers and daughters, adult daughters, and that so I don't know how they would measure serotonin, so maybe that's not the measurement, but about the interactions and the feelings that daughters have after a conversation with their mothers when it's done digitally by text, which is how many of us have been connecting for a number of years now, especially during COVID, for some reason. And then how they respond differently or feel differently about those conversations and those relationships if they're done by phone, which was fascinating to me because I've often thought of that as generational. I'm older, the phone's comfortable for me. that's my hang up. But in fact, it seems more like what you were talking about, that the ways that we engage with people, where we can really hear their voices in one way or another, are meaningful to the relationships we set, and therefore, of course, to whether or not people feel like they're being truly engaged, authentically engaged as donors, so they aren't just, again, cash machines. Yeah, so I'd love to dive into that, but I know that you have some practical advice for us today. So you have these 5 keys that you've been talking about in terms of authentic donor engagement. Can you talk about what those are?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one is mindset, and our mindset really matters. And going back to the chapter I wrote in talking about, looking for the pony, um, we so the first part about your mindset is to be aware of it. So I do a lot of trainings, so especially with boards, and I have conversations on a regular basis with executive directors who say, "I have this board, they're so committed, they care deeply, and they won't fundraise, and will you help me?" And then I have to say, "Well, is it a skills issue, or is it a willingness/mindset issue?" And oftentimes it's a mindset issue. And look, we all grew up with messages around money. And money's a pretty taboo subject for a lot of people. And so first becoming aware of what were the messages that you had when you were growing up. Was it money doesn't grow on trees, or money's dirty, you touched it, wash your hands, or the conversations people had about people who had money or didn't have money? And were they good or bad, or trustworthy or not trustworthy, or right? So I think the first thing is to realize, what are the messages that one has, and how might that be in the way of that relationship? And I'm a therapist, so a lot of the work that people do in therapy is looking at their thoughts and then noticing which ones are negative, toxic, and going to work on them. And we can do that too around our thoughts about money. But we can't go to work on them if we're not aware of them. And so, for example, you might have a fear for fundraising because you think someone's going to judge you, or they're going to think, "Oh, you're just going to think I'm using you to get money," or they're not going to like me, all the thoughts that people have. And so then you can step back and say, "Okay, well, what's my experience when I donate money?" Well, for me, there's some issues in the world that are overwhelming and depressing and greatly scary and concerning to me. And I sometimes feel helpless and don't know what to do about those issues. And so sometimes something really simple that I can do is make a donation. And because there are other people and they have a really great plan, and I trust them and I like them, and they're in action and they're doing great work. And you know what? I feel relief that I can invest in some of their great work, right? That's a gift to me, because I can move from feeling hopeless to, you know what? There's someone doing something great, and I'm a little bit part of that. And so I think, right, I can shift from, as a donor, from, wow, I'm feeling hopeless, to I'm part of the solution. And what a gift to be part of helping to make that solution. And so as a fundraiser, we're connectors, we're bridges, we're helping people invest in what makes their heart sing, and the difference they want to make in the world. And but I think we have to say what sometimes might be in the way in the stories we have about developing that authentic relationship.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, there's so many different thoughts I have even about that, but that's number one. That's mindset.
Yeah. All right. Number two is it's self-care in service of showing up your best. And so my experience, especially early on as an executive director, and I can imagine for pretty much all executive directors, development directors, that burnout rate is so high, and the to-do list is endless. And there's what you have on your priority list, and there's, right, all the other things that come in, the 100 emails a day you get. And so it's so easy to run ourselves ragged, which is part of why there's such a high turnover rate. And what I realized when I was running, 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 and, never getting everything done. And then like, oh, I didn't get that thing done. And then I'd show up to these donor meetings and I'd be doing my best, but I was exhausted and I was on the brink of burnout. And at some point I said, oh, I am not able to show up and hold that container, be my best, be an authentic connection because I'm exhausted. And I realized that I would block time in my calendar, especially when I had these big meetings that I felt, I was making a big ask. It was important. I had to show up my best. And so I would block time. I'd take a walk. I'd go to yoga. I'd do something. Maybe I'd just take 3 deep breaths. But I knew that I needed to be resourced because my energy, my passion, my excitement is contagious. And if I don't have it, if I can't get in touch with it, then I can't make a real connection. I can't really be present and, use my intuition to kind of, read between the lines. And if I'm not able to tap into my genuine excitement and passion about the impact of the work, I can't share it. And so it moved from this is a luxury, this is selfish, to actually, this is what I need to do to be effective in my work. And that was a radical mindset shift I had. But I noticed that when I didn't do it, and when I was exhausted and I'd show up, I didn't have these great connections, and and people didn't invest the same in the work because I couldn't share it and connect in the same way. So I think moving from this concept of, yeah, try to do that somewhere else, to actually, this is a critical part of sustainability for our sector and our work.
Just a couple of things in that before you move on to number 3. I'm wondering if knowing why that's important makes the difference, because you just talked about how this isn't a selfish thing. This is something that allows us to be kind of our best selves, to really be real. But I wonder if that realization it makes it much easier for us to not only give ourselves the opportunity for self-care, but also to care in a way that shows that we really care for others. We're not just caring for ourselves.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Because self-care has been a big issue in our sector, but I'm not sure, aside from this practical example you just gave about blocking time in the calendar, which I love, I'm not sure how much we've done about it. We've talked about it, but maybe it's that we lack the why.
Yeah. And I'm not going to say it's easy, and I'm not going to say I could do it all the time or every day, but I think that when we look at the crisis in our sector of the turnover and burnout rate, I think saying, it is not better to push at 150% and meet our goals this year and then have a total turnover in of our staff next year and then have to reestablish all of our relationships. So that is not good long-term thinking. And so part of what I would do for self-care, some of the mindset shifts I would do is, first of all, I got really clear, like, what am I saying yes to and what am I saying no to? And getting like, what are the big things I have to move forward? And even at the end of the day, at the end, you look at your list. And if you were like me, often the list is way longer than the hours I had in my day. And so, you look at it, you'd be like, even though you got big things done, you'd be like, ugh, I didn't get that thing done. And so what I would do to shift from that to the mindset is I go home and I take out a blank piece of paper and I would write down, what did I get done? And I would celebrate it. I'd say, like, look what I got done today. Look how I moved the needle forward. And then I'd light a candle and I'd be like, I'm done. I'm leaving work. I'm showing up to my life. And sometimes I had thoughts, I wrote them down. Sometimes I have to go back and do an email because I was like, oh, I really got to do that. And then I would, I'd light that candle again and I'd be like, all right, I'm coming back to my life because I have to. I think I don't know that there's work-life balance, but there's like a juggling act. And we're like, what ball am I keeping in the air? And we can't drop the ball that is our sanity and our health. Even though
Yeah,
sometimes we can, juggle it and it's not always that, but.
I love all of that, including lighting the candle, in part because whether or not people actually physically light a candle, you have a process that says, okay, completion, celebration. And I'm sure for everybody that might be a little bit different. So it's really nice that you have that and then you practice it. And that's those rituals are so important. And we do have a couple people who have mentioned this, I know, in the chat about having gratitude. Carrie mentioned this for setting aside time to evaluate energy before the big asks and connection points. That's a wonderful thing. And as you move on, Sharon, to the next item here, I'd love to know, maybe in the chat, if anyone here in the room with us have ways that they are practicing self-care that you want to share with the group, because I think all of us benefit in a way from hearing how our people are actually putting that into practice. So please do share.
And I'd
Yes.
love to say also that in your life, but also before you do big things, you're speaking at events, you're going on big donor asks, what are your rituals?
Right. I love that. Okay, so number 3.
All right. Number 3 is get curious, which I'm sure people are already doing. But there's that saying that, can you talk 25% of the time and let the donor talk 75% of the time? And it's not a perfect science, but the point is that we're not selling anything. We're getting to know someone, we're sitting down. And I used to be executive director of an LGBT center. And so one of the questions I would ask people is, what was your coming out story? Or if they happen to be part of the LGBT community. And I would learn a lot. And as people were talking, and then I'd hear what were the points, maybe their pain points or their struggles or things that were really wonderful or people that showed up with them. And I'd hold that with them, and it got interesting really quickly in our relationship. And then I also understood what they cared about. And then as I talked about the work that we do, I would understand that there was someone really important, for example, maybe when they were coming out as a teen. And then I talk about how we provide that important person for young people, that I could connect what was important to them with what we're doing, if there was a connection, if it was genuine. And so I think that, asking them questions, listening, and, we're not interrogating them, we're not interviewing, but we're having a conversation. And it's like, when you show up to a dinner party, you don't have a whole agenda in your head. You're showing up to be an authentic conversation. And so, having that curiosity and yeah, and being real and present.
I love that. And talking about it in the context of, working with a community which is sometimes, inflicted with harm, obviously, where issues can be sensitive on a personal level. It's a big question. And it's one that can engender a lot of trust when you just let people tell their own stories. Um, More broadly, are there areas where we can explore those personal issues from anybody that we're talking to, where it doesn't feel like interrogation? Do you have other thoughts on that, about how we can make sure we can ask good questions and make space for people to tell their story without it seeming like we're, jumping in too early?
Yeah. Well, I think there's always a question of, if someone has been a donor before, what's inspired you to invest in this work? What resonates about it? What do you see in our community? What are you concerned about? What are you hopeful about? What are your dreams and wishes? I think asking questions that aren't too personal, but give the space for people to share.
Yeah. And then also, I know that sometimes when we go into those spaces where we're asking those questions and people really start to share a lot, there are people who share more than we anticipate.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on how to make sure that we make space for them to then maybe do something which in another context might be seen as oversharing, but I think maybe they just need to say what they need to say?
Absolutely. I think that anyone in the world, that presence is a gift. And I think that especially in our distracted culture, that it is such a gift to put our phones down and look someone in the eye and be 100% present. And that actually brings me to my next point, which is building trust with verbal and nonverbal communication. And so 80% of communication is not what we say, it's how we say it. And it's how we say it and what we do with our body. So, am I leaning forward and looking someone in the eyes, or am I, distracted, looking all around, looking at my phone, right? That says a lot. The tone of voice I'm using. Am I saying, wow, I really appreciate that you shared that with me? Or am I going to say, wow, I really appreciate you shared that with me? Right. I mean, it's like the tone of voice we use is going to say a lot
It
more than just
matters.
the words we say. It matters. And
Right.
so I think that but also a way to build trust is to be trustworthy. And I think that part of that is transparency around financials, transparency about what's working and where you're growing and your challenges are. And so I think that there's that's also part of it's how we communicate, it's what we communicate, and it's what we share in an appropriate way. But I think that also really is important for trust, is that transparency.
There's a lot to unpack in that too. If you don't mind, I'd like to ask about one part, which has been kind of a conundrum for fundraising for a long time. The people who are really good empathizers and listen well, um, uh, that is a gift, I think, that we give to people. As you're saying, um, there's another aspect. Sometimes people expect us to share, to be authentically ourselves. And one example you just gave is to be open and transparent about the organization itself. But then the question is sometimes, well, how much should we be transparent about ourselves individually? Is there a
Yeah.
line that we should or should not cross? I know this is in the abstract, but do
Yeah.
you have any thoughts about how far do we go personally as representatives of organizations in talking about ourselves? Is there a kind of a blurry line we should observe to make sure that this is really about the person and their engagement with the
Absolutely.
mission versus with us personally as our friends?
Absolutely. It's a great question. And um with my therapist hat on, it's self-disclosure in therapy is appropriate as long as it is in service of the client. So when I had the professional hat on as the executive director of the LGBT Center, it was I was professionally out. It was totally appropriate to talk about my wife and my kids and marriage equality, all these things. Like that was actually felt part of my job. But when I was executive director of a health center, I didn't necessarily lead with that, right? That it was, if it felt appropriate to the conversation, but it's self-disclosure if it felt appropriate and relevant. And so, but it's not, um that relationship is not, if somebody is going to share a lot with me, then I'm happy to hold that. But it's not their job to hold that for me. And so it's not my venting session. And so if there's something I'm sharing in connection that feels relevant or feels, but if I hold a different political view about something that might be a hot topic, I don't need to bring it up if that's not the topic we're talking about. Is if it's going to create division, if it's something. And so I think, like, if we're here to talk about this thing, and then let's talk about it. And I'm not saying that um if somebody said something racist or homophobic, that you wouldn't call someone out, and in ways like, hey, let me get curious about that. And I'm not saying that we're gonna let people be inappropriate, but I think that there's lots of contentious issues, um and I'm not going to purposely create division on one issue if that's not the issue that we're talking about today, with my
Yeah, I
work hat
really
on.
appreciate your talking about that, because if there's another topic that comes up over and over in every conversation about everything, including in fundraising and nonprofits, it's this idea of this division, and what contributes to that. Scott in the chat was talking about commonality, building trust. You've been kind of modeling that even in talking with me, the times we've talked, and right now. But also in our conversations with donors, it's knowing that it's about their that or that person and their engagement with the mission. I know that one of the things that comes up is sometimes donors might ask our opinion about something, and that then can lead to this area where I'll just mention a couple of things that might be LGBTQ issues because of marriage equality. A few years ago, I hope it's not as contentious in some quarters now, but I think it probably still is. Trans rights certainly is, and Middle East. I mean, we can mention 100 subjects where that
Right.
becomes, wow, that must be the missile launch button. And I just wonder
Yeah.
how we also learn to politely listen and not necessarily engage when people are looking to find division.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's okay if someone says, what do you think about this super hot button issue, to say, oh, that is such a good question. And if we had all day, maybe we'd broach it. But I was hoping right now that we could talk this. I really would love to ask you a question. So I think, there are ways to jump around things. If you don't want to get into them, because there you may work for uh, an environmental organization doing really incredible conservation work, and you may have alignment with that donor on that issue, but you may not have alignment on abortion or the Middle East or so many other things. And so why muck up your really why muck up talking about investing in this, really, because that's what you came to have the conversation about. And if someone so I would, if as it feels appropriate, steer them back to the conversation you came to have, if they're going into territory that you feel like might create that division. And I mean, there's no hard and fast rules, but it would, if you're there to talk about really important land conservation and you have different ideas on abortion, do you want that issue to be what you're talking about if that's not your work?
Yeah, thank you. I know that's not the focus of our conversation today, but that's such a beautiful answer. And these things do happen, and these conversations do take unexpected turns. So I didn't mean to stop you. So I think we're
Yeah.
now at number 5.
Yes. All right. And the fifth one is be of service. And I think part of that is, and I am channeling Lynn Twist, in talking about believing that there is sufficient amount of funds. So, right, we're not going in being like, oh, I have to have this, and we're not treating people as ATMs, but trusting, if I'm holding the framework, I'm a bridge, and my job is I'm gonna make an invitation, and if this is right for this person, they're gonna invest, and if not, then I hope they find something that does make the heart sing. And I'm, of course, we're gonna do some donor education and share why this is important and the great work we're doing, and of course, but if that's not where they're investing this year because there's another issue that they're really concerned about, I think that then being of service, say, I completely understand why you really care about that. And sometimes I've said, do you know about this other great organization? If they're, being of service, both in the way of, if it's not right, for if they don't want to invest in your work, then there might be another connection you can make them where they can invest to support the other great work in our community. But it also might be being of service that someone needs a gardener. They're sharing things with you, and there might be ways that you can be of service. And I think that's been a great way that I've developed relationships, is because they've been looking for services or something in the community or a health issue provider, and I can make a recommendation, and then I can follow up, or I can send them resources. And so I think it's who I am in the world, that I just, I used to run a community center, that I like that work, but I think that it's also it's part of building relationships. Is yes, we're going to do our job. We're if it's an ask meeting, we're going to ask for their support, but we're going to show up with, I am here to be of service. And if that it is of service for them to make the contribution in our work, then fantastic. And if not, then I still want to make that connection.
Yeah, yeah. So kind of going through these again, we've got mindset, self-care, getting curious, building the trust with verbal, nonverbal communication, being of service, which certainly sounds like it's foundational. Um, are all these things kind of equal in your mind? Is there anything that kind of stands out that you lead with
Yeah, well,
in your work?
I think the mindset can be really toxic for us. And so that's why I said it first. I think about, and it can just really get in the way. I think about a former board member I worked with, who somehow got put on the major donor committee, and would take the meetings, but would never ask anybody for money ever. So I'd notice she'd go out, she'd have a nice time, and she just couldn't, she just wouldn't make the ask. And so, it was sitting down and over time working on that mindset and what's in the way and what would it be like if they said yes? What would it be like if they said no? And, getting doing the work to support her to she ended up being able to make six-figure asks and being really effective and, helping on a capital campaign. And so seeing that movement. I think that there are ways that when people have the mindset blocks that we can spin our wheels and really suffer. So I'd say that's, first. And then second, I really think the self-care that so much of being in relationship is having the capacity to do it. And I know that when I am not well resourced, I do not show up as well in the world in any relationship, whether that's, at home or at work. And so I think that just realizing I mean, for me, I just realized I have to wake up before my kids wake up. I have to do my morning routine. I have to fill myself up first. And because if I don't, I am just not as good at anything in my life and I don't feel as good. And so I think I've just learned that taking that time is a good investment in myself and sanity.
Yeah, as Carrie is saying here in the chat, being in a relationship is having the capacity to do it. Or since I'm about to jump on a very long flight tomorrow, it's put on your own mask before helping others.
Yes,
No
absolutely.
oxygen, and you
Absolutely.
can't help anybody.
That's right.
And this, the reason I didn't ask any follow-ups on mindset is because I also feel like it's so important, but it's also so thorny. And it sounds like that's been something that you've dealt with in every part of your career, maybe your life, is this mindset issue, which is so important. And you talked about messages about money and the negative and toxic thoughts we have. And since I mean, you approach the work with this knowledge as an LCSW, but then in there as a consultant and dealing with strategic issues, fundraising issues, nonprofit management issues. And I'm just wondering how you help them, how you help your clients or other organizations, or maybe just people in the sector and you talk with, to have a conversation within themselves that lets them turn off those, what we call in my household, ants, stomp the ants, the
Mhm.
automatic negative thoughts.
Yeah.
um, because we don't all either have the benefit of having had, let's say, therapeutic sessions or discussions within our organizations about what's a negative thought and how to kind of turn that around in an authentic and real way. How do you help clients and others in the sector think about that, since they're not in a therapeutic setting?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm going to throw out a great resource. Byron Katie has an amazing book called Loving What Is that is really fantastic. And she has something called The Work. And she has a way that you have your negative thought and you look at it. And the first thing you say is it true? And the second question is it really true? And the third question is, who or what would I be without that thought? And then because I think it's really powerful, with what
Yeah.
is the cost of this thought? And then the fourth part of her questions um, is a turnaround. Like if you look at something opposite, that is it just as true or truer? So is it, if you have the thought that people with money are greedy, let's pretend that was a thought you had that's in the way. And then you turn around and you say, well, people with money are generous. Is that just as true or truer? Well, we look at philanthropists, we look at, who's funded our organization. So you take the thought and there are ways to look at it. But I think the first part is becoming aware of what is that negative thought. And then it does take work and it's not automatic. And it's not like once you do it, your automatic thoughts don't come back because they're automatic, right? You may have had them your whole life. And so that's why concepts like affirmations and before you go into meetings, what are the messages that you want to hold, like say them, like having mantras and having things that you say over and over. It's the work to disrupt those negative thoughts to have new thoughts that serve you.
um, at the risk of putting you, or maybe these thoughts rather, on the spot, what are some of the most common kind of negative or toxic thoughts that you encounter specifically in fundraising besides rich people are greedy? Because I think sometimes there's value in calling them out. At least that's my opinion. What do
Yeah.
you?
So I think a big one, and so there's a people pleaser sense of me. So the idea of rejection for me, especially early on, was really hard. I think people or the and so being able to sit with that and say, okay, well, I'm afraid of someone saying no. And so I know, especially early on, when I had that thought, I had to say, well, first of all, are they saying no to me, or is this not the right thing they want to invest in? But also, it was shifting from they're not rejecting me to it's my job to ask, it's their job to decide. And I am not this work. I am somebody who is giving an invitation, and I want them to find something to invest in that supports our community. And if it's right, so it's keep working around all the different parts of it. But I think again, first is becoming aware of it, and it's great. I think it's important to say them out loud and have someone reflect back to you. Where maybe they can see a different perspective. And again, that goes back to my chapter, put you in a pile of poop, what are you looking for? The flies in muck or the pony? Because we always have a choice. We don't live in reality. We live in our stories, and we can change our stories. And we can, and noticing what stories might be in the way of our relationships.
Yeah, there's a big focus on storytelling in our sector. It's often looking outward, like what story is going to sell this thing.
Mhm.
But there are stories also that we tell ourselves that kind of position us to be probably more, not only more effective, but more real and more positive. So it's nice to hear about stories in that context, the stories we tell ourselves, not just the stories we tell others. And we are seeing some great comments in the chat. So thank you, Nicole and Margaret, for some of this, talking about that you recently heard someone saying when thinking about things, is it true? Is it positive? Is this useful to me? And
I
then
like
Margaret
it.
talking about how nothing beats the authentic personal connection with a donor. And I'm sure that Sharon, you would agree with that. Um, if there are other thoughts, comments, or questions here, maybe things specifically that you've encountered that you want to explore, we can certainly do that. So please do, as we kind of round out things, post something in the chat or the Q&A. We'll be watching for that. Sharon, you called out a couple of things as you were talking about this. One is the book, which we didn't have a chance to put in the chat. So would you mind sharing that again? And so we can see if we can put that there.
Sure. Oh, I don't think I can put it in the chat, but
Oh,
maybe Jack can.
yes. And the name of the book and the author again was?
It Success Redefined,
Right.
which is
Mhm. Which is,
and you can
yes.
get, actually,
Well,
it's on Amazon, but it's also you can get my website, Sharon Papo, uh /purchase. And I'm going to do just a call out because I want
yeah.
to people haven't read The Generosity
Oh,
Crisis. I feel like it's a really phenomenal book and talks a lot about connection. So it feels really relevant to our conversation today. And if people haven't read it, then I just highly, highly recommend it.
I'm sure that Nathan will appreciate that. For those who don't know, Nathan is the head honcho for all things AI and beyond at DonorSearch. Wonderful person, speaking a lot on that book this year. And I'm sure he would not only appreciate your mentioning that, but also making the connection you've made between the work that you're doing and the work that he's doing, and the importance of both and how they complement one another. There's also sessions that he's done in this series that you can find over at DonorSearch on donorsearch.net under the resources tab. And you mentioned one other book now that I'm not remembering the name of when I asked about other resources that you look to.
Oh, Byron Katie. I think that
Byron
was the
Katie.
one, right? Talking about the work, just about looking at our negative thoughts. That's a really powerful book. Loving
And
what
is that
is.
Cady or is it Katie? How is that
I think
spelled? Do you
it's
know?
Katie
Okay, thank you.
is my best guess. And I
All right.
noticed
Well, we'll look.
Gwen has a
Oh,
yes, Colleen. Thank you, Byron Katie. Gwen has a question. I have a direct report who I'm having a hard time coaching to be simple and authentic with our donors rather than over effusive. What
and
would
then
you
deflecting. Yeah.
advise?
Mhm.
Um, well, Um, I think that um, I'm wondering if they are being, when you say over effusive, I'm wondering if they're talking a lot and if they could be really encouraged to listen. I'm wondering if you might want to practice with them, sitting down and asking questions. Because I'm wondering if maybe they're getting nervous. And so sometimes when people get nervous, they just talk and talk and talk. Um, and I think practice. I think practice is great for all of us. I mean, I think these are skills. So as when I was in my training for to be a therapist, right, you got a lot of training, and so I think that anyone who's holding space to have practice sessions, give feedback. You know, it's like that tribe. Maybe there's three people, and one person is the pretend donor, and one person's the pretend fundraiser, and one person is the observer, and then gets to say, "This is what you did great," and hey, here's a suggestion for you to consider. And so that might be a great way. But I think that there's also something about, so there's the skills, but also the mindset. I'd get curious, what do they want to get out of the meetings? How do they feel that they're going? It might be great for them to go with someone else who to kind of shadow, because I think that some people, as we're learning these skills, it's hard to learn them if we can't see them done by others in action. So I think the buddy system is really great for a few reasons. One is so that people, as they're becoming comfortable, I think especially for board members, but any staff too, as people are getting comfortable, it's really great to see other people and how they hold these relationships. But I also think that when organizations only have a relationship between one person and a donor, and that person leaves, then it can put an organization in crisis. And I have seen it too many times. And so it's really important to share relationships. And so that because people have a connection to a person at an organization, and when that person leaves, because at some point we will all leave, that they can still feel connected. And that's really important.
Yeah. Oh, and thank you, Jennifer, for sharing that link. It's very helpful too. And then we have a note from Lena about what are some ways that we can write an email. So a very tactical but important thing to build that relationship so they agree to meet and increase response rate. Do you have any thoughts on this? That's a practical application of donor engagement, certainly.
Yes, well, I can say that first of all, this is where technology might help you, that you can put into ChatGPT or whatever you use, create a warm email, in a warm tone that maybe you want to say that says, thank you for going to our event last week, and I enjoyed hearing about your cat, and I'd love to share more about this new blah 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 we're doing. And so I think for like the emails and the writing, that is a great place to try to save yourself time. And when you tell ChatGPT to have a professional, warm and friendly tone, and it can get you a good start. But I think when you talk about increasing the response rate, part of what I think about is how does that donor want to be contacted, and is email even the best way? And or do they prefer phone calls, or do they prefer text messages? Have you asked them? And so sometimes you might email a couple times, and if they don't respond, then you might, if you have their number, you might call them. And if they don't respond, you might text them and say, hey, I'm trying to reach you. I'm not sure what the best way. I just wanted to try to reach out. Would love you. So I think that there's, being, we're not stalking people, but if they didn't say no, we don't have to hear no. People get busy. I know that there's things I intend to do, that there are emails that I absolutely intending to do that I have not gotten back to people. And when they email me again, I'm appreciative because I want to, I intend to, I just haven't gotten around to it on my very busy list. And so I think that, so I would say that also sometimes I talk it out. And I also want to say that the energy both of that when you send something out, that sometimes I write something and I notice in that moment I might feel frustrated or tired or not heart-centered. And you know what? I won't send it at that time. I'll wait so that I can send it with that positive energy, and I hope that they get that energy.
Yeah, no, I love that.
And
I wanted to ask you, net, as you think about all this in the work, what's the hardest part for you and what's the most joyful?
Um, well, I think the hardest part for me has been when there's more to be done, when the wishes of all that we do are bigger. And so it's so, we always think bigger than we have capacity. So I think saying the no's, because as a people pleaser and a yes person and a visionary, I want to do all these things. And so I think sometimes saying no to things I think are great ideas is hard. But that protecting your sanity and your self-care. And my favorite part is sitting down with people when you have that really genuine connection. I mean, I remember some incredible donor meetings I've had where I've sat with someone and we cried, and it was so personal, and they were making the biggest gift of their life, and it was so meaningful to them, and they were going to make such an incredible impact, and it was such a gift to facilitate that and be part of it. And so that's the magic, when you get to make big things happen, and move resources to make critical, beautiful things happen in our community. That lights me up.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for all of this, Sharon. Really, really do appreciate it. And again, I know people know how to get your book, but how can they, learn more about you or follow your work or reach out to you and talk?
Yeah, you can reach me through my website, which is my name, SharonPapo.com, SharonPapo.com. And you can get my email there and all those things. And
Great.
would love to hear from people, if you have any questions, follow-ups, would love to hear from you.
And we just put that in the chat as well. Thank you, Jack, for that. I really want to encourage everybody to follow Sharon's work, get that book, if there's a copy available. I know there is. But anyway, it's popular, so hurry up. And just thank you for putting, making the human-centered part of this work the focus of this conversation, but also the focus of everything we do. Really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Great to be here.
And I'll look forward to seeing all of you in the next session. You can look for that in the calendar. You're going to see that over at DonorSearch.net. Don't quiz me on when, because I don't even know what day it is sometimes when I'm here, but I will be back in the States on Thursday, so I'll be looking forward to that. Thank you, Ashley. Yes, safe travels tomorrow. Definitely looking forward to making a safe trip back. And so I'll look forward to seeing all of you back when I'm stateside, but until then, take care, and look for the little QR code if you would, so you can be a part of our email notifications about sessions like this one. Really do appreciate it. Thank you, Sharon.